wonderful good evening. Yes, it is I, the conspicuous Moo. Now, I just want to talk to you about something I've been playing around with for a couple of days now. Basically just playing around with talents and seeing what was working and what isn't working. Because I picked up my Charred Passions Legendary and stuck it on my feet. It was very expensive, 120,000, but it's a rank 2, so that's great. But I want to go over this particular build. It very much works with Charred Passions and with Celestial Flames, which is one of the less popular talents on the bottom row of the Brewmaster tree. So, without further ado, let us get cracking. So, as an introduction, let's go over the basic mechanics of how this all fits together. First of all, of course, we have Breath of Fire, much maligned, not great damage, does a bit up front, then does a dot as long as the target is affected by Keg Smash, so you always need to Keg Smash anyway, it's still your first priority button, and it also gives you 5% damage reduction if you use Breath of Fire while Keg Smash is affecting it. So that's very nice. We move on to Charred Passions. This is the legendary power. So, basically, whenever you use Breath of Fire, you get an 8-second window that is a buff called Charred Passions, and all of your Blackout kicks and Spinning Crane kicks will do an additional 100% damage as fire damage, which is very, very nice indeed. Fire damage, of course, bypasses armor as well, so there's no mitigation from your enemies there. And it will also refresh the duration of Breath of Fire on the target, which means that you have 100% coverage of that 5% damage reduction. So, while that's a small thing, it's still, you know, relatively nice. Now we get into the interesting bit, which is Celestial Flames. Now, this is the middle talent on the bottom row. It is usually passed over because High Tolerance as a talent and as a passive is really quite strong. This is also a passive effect, but basically every time you use a Purifying Brew or a Celestial Brew or a Black Ox Brew, anything brew related really, it has a 30% chance to proc this Celestial Flames buff. Now this lasts for 6 seconds, and basically if you use Spinning Crane Kick, at any point during that 6-second buff, it will reset Breath of Fire and will also increase the damage reduction from 5% to 10% on Breath of Fire. Now that is the interesting and key point here. If you look at the tooltip, it just says that it applies Breath of Fire. So, well, yes, that's nice, but when you actually use it, it resets the cooldown on it entirely. And that has some major implications for the damage that this build can do. So, the reason why this reset is important. In terms of your normal rotation, and I'm simplifying this greatly here, but basically you open with your Keg Smash, your Breath of Fire. If you've got Phalanx Stomp, you would put that in between, but that's for another time. Charred Passions, of course, changes the rotation significantly. You would Keg Smash, you would Breath of Fire, and that would activate the 8-second buff of Charred Passions. Now, at this point, you'd want to put in as many Blackout kicks and Spinning Crane kicks as you possibly could, while weaving in everything else in the priority of the system. So, you know, your Covenant abilities, your Keg Smash. Instants are better because, you know, it's not that big of a window, so you need to get as much damage in as possible. That's what this legendary is all about, doing damage. And then you would go back to your regular rotation once the 8-second buff of Charred Passions had dropped off, and you'd wait until Breath of Fire came back up, Breath of Fire, and then you'd get another 8 seconds of Charred Passions. So far we've done Breath of Fire with Charred Passions, and that's fine. Now you introduce Celestial Flames into the mix, and the fact that once that proc is up, you just need to do a Spinning Crane Kick and the thing resets. That's significant, because the way that it works, it's now possible that you just do your normal brew drinking rotation. Celestial Flames will come up relatively regularly. At 30%, it's not a very high percentage for a proc, but no matter if you're just doing your regular rotation, it's going to come up quite a lot. And it will greatly increase the uptime of your Charred Passions, because your Charred Passions is always activated as soon as you hit Breath of Fire. So, we'll go through this now. Breath of Fire, so Charred Passions is up for 8 seconds. Now you're doing your Blackout Kick and your Spinning Crane Kicks in the 8-second window, and you're weaving in instants, and 2 of those instants are likely to be Purifying Brew and Celestial Brew because they are your defensive abilities. Every time you hit one of those, you have a 30% chance to proc the Celestial Flames. Now, if it does proc, a Spinning Crane Kick will reset the cooldown of Breath of Fire. And you would be using Spinning Crane Kick anyway over, say, something like Tiger Palm, even on single target, because it's just more damage inside that Charred Passions window. When the first Charred Passions has finished, you would then be able to hit Breath of Fire again and then get another 8 seconds of Charred Passions up, which is nuts, because it means you can do 100% more fire damage for another 8 seconds using Blackout Kick and Spinning Crane Kick. But yeah, basically you just need to keep an eye out for whenever Celestial Flames comes up, hit Spinning Crane Kick, that will reset Breath of Fire, and the next time that Charred Passions has worn off, you can just reapply Breath of Fire and get another 8 seconds of Charred Passions, and that's where the Celestial Flames is so important. So here I'll try and give you an example of how this all goes together. So, Keg Smash, Phalanx Stomp, Breath of Fire, and as you can see, it's already reset the Celestial Flames. I wait until Charred Passions has worn off, then I can hit Breath of Fire again, Keg Smash, Breath of Fire, Charred Passions is back up, and just using my brews, I've triggered Celestial Flames again. I'll wait until it wears off, Keg Smash, Breath of Fire, Charred Passions is up again. So, you know, as you can see, if you're lucky enough with the procs, but from drinking your brews, you can, in theory, keep this thing up for an extraordinary amount of time. But of course, it's not all candies and roses. You know, there are downsides to choosing Celestial Flames in the first place, and being able to use this much more high damage build. On the upside, you know, you get much higher uptime on Charred Passions, as you've just seen, and so therefore damage as well. If damage is what you're looking for, and presumably you are because you chose Charred Passions, then this is definitely the way to go at the moment. You will get much higher uptime and the extra 5% damage reduction, and you'll still have 100% of that extra 5% because of Charred Passions in the way that it extends the Breath of Fire duration. The disadvantages are losing High Tolerance. Now, High Tolerance has been a staple for at least a couple of expansions now, and you know, it's very strong for what it does. You know, it gives you 5% haste at green stagger, 10% haste at yellow stagger, and 15% haste at red stagger. Now, haste is not all that important to a brewmaster, but it still has some importance. It does reduce the cooldown of your purifying brews, for example, and your keg smashes. Those would be the two most important abilities that are affected by haste, and you would lose that automatic thing when you went into combat. And there is also the 5% stagger damage improvement as well that you would be sacrificing if you took Celestial Flame. So there are some possible defensive drawbacks in that respect. You will have slightly less brew reduction as well, because at no point will you have time in a Celestial Flames rotation to use Tiger Palm, which means you'll be probably sacrificing that 1 second reduction. Frankly, if you're using Tiger Palm in this rotation, then you're probably not pushing the right buttons, because you know, I haven't been able to find a space in 2 days to put a Tiger Palm in. The 30% proc and the randomosity of it is something that tanks in general, and one of those I'm not particularly overly fond of. And because we don't have that many brews these days, you know, the days when we had like 4 brews that we could all sort of swiggle at the same time are now gone. So because we have less brews, there's going to be less uptime, and you know, you may not like that procky nature. I'm going to make a tell me when, basically 2 large buttons at the top saying Charred Passions and Celestial Flames, just like that, and they'll just like beep at me whenever they pop up, because I find myself looking down and then I'm not paying attention to other mechanics. But that's just me. So, final remarks. I didn't want to make this one a long one. It is a much busier rotation, and it's very proc based, and it's very like, oh, keep you on your toes. So if you're into that kind of build and you want to push additional damage, then this is great fun. If you want to keep things relatively simple, especially in lower gear levels, then probably don't do this. It may pay in the long term. I think it will pay if you actually start trimming some of the buttons. And we already have quite a bit of button bloat because they brought all of these abilities back, some of which are of highly dubious value. I swapped out Chi Burst and went for Eye of the Tiger, because then I just have a passive, and I really had trouble fitting Chi Burst into the rotation. And Rushing Jade Wind as well, because it falls significantly down the line as a priority, because you've got all these other buttons and all these other procs happening, and so it kind of became a filler spell. So I just went with Exploding Keg, because it's on a minute and I can chuck it out, do a whole bunch of damage, and then that's it. I don't have to worry about it for another minute, and I can concentrate on the rest of the rotation. You can fish for it using your brews. but the random nature of it is probably not a great idea, and I think it's taking min-maxing a little bit too far. If you're just doing your standard rotation, you should be absolutely fine. You'll get plenty of procs, and as long as you're using a spinning crane kick after Celestial Flames is active, because that resets Breath of Fire, then everything's going to be lovely. You know, and then you just hit your Breath of Fire once the Charred Passions runs out, get another 8 seconds. It's beautiful. And yes, that's it. That's just a very, very brief update. I've got a ton of things. I've got to watch all of the guides for Castle Nathria because they're going in on Sunday. Now, I've looked at Shriekwing, so I got that covered. I think I know how that's going to go. But other than that, I really haven't been doing my homework properly, so I'm going to toddle off and do that now. One last thing I forgot to mention is that Blizzard have made a fix to Angry Dave, who is Invoke Nizal, the Black Ox. Apparently his stomp was doing too much damage, and so they have corrected it. Now, at the moment, we're not really sure how that's going to affect the Conduit priority. I mean, Walk with the Ox will be affected by this. We're still doing a bit of testing as to whether, you know, Scalding Brew is coming back in to replace Walk with the Ox now as a result of this change. I will keep you posted on that. Anyway, really have to toddle off now. Right, so I'm the Conspicuous Moo, and a very good evening to you.